This is my video of the do's and don'ts from the 4 major card games. So throughout my videos, I think a lot of people have taken away a lot of design lessons from me talking about the different card games and how all of the different games I talk about have a lot of different design things about them that a lot of people end up taking away. A lot of inspired designers see my videos and come in with the obvious issues of the major card games that I end up talking about and think, oh, wow, Mana Screw is really bad in Magic. Maybe I can do something about that. I don't really like the way the extra deck plays in Yu-Gi-Oh, but I do really like the cool boss monsters, or I don't really like the way that prize card mechanic works in Pokemon, and I think it could be manipulated in some way to make it better. A lot of these design philosophies come from the idea of that these games are great, except there's something that needs to be fixed about them. And that if you make a new card game with almost the same elements, but you simply fix some of the issues present in Magic, Pokemon, or Yu-Gi-Oh, you'll be able to make an even better game that performs just as well. So in this video, I'm going to talk about one do and one don't from all of the major card games I talk about in videos, and if you're going to take things away from them, what you should and shouldn't look at from each of the card games. If there's one thing that you should take away from Magic, do take Magic's keywords. Keywords like flying here on Sarah Angel, which says this creature can't be blocked except by creatures with flying, are a great way to communicate things to your players without you actually having to put a lot of work into teaching them. Another card like Banana's Knight here has flash and first strike. Both of these keywords can kind of give you an idea of not only what the mechanic is that is present in your game, but also by having it shortened down to a simple word, you can get an idea of what the keyword does even before you have played the game at all or use the keyword even once. The simplicity of Magic keywords and also their mirror to the real world makes it a lot easier for players to get into the game and start understanding the mechanics of Magic without having to learn an absolute ton of the rulebook before actually playing. If a card has first strike, it simply strikes first. If a card has flying, it can't be stopped except by other things that fly. All of these things are easy to make sense of in your head when you are starting to play the game. These keywords help make Magic cards easy to read, which will not only make it so that way you can put more text on the cards later, freeing up space in your design for the future, but also can help you both teach new players and also show older players new ways of implementing mechanics that are easy to understand. This also helps to serve as you can overlap multiple mechanics at the same time. Say, for example, by putting a different keyword on a spell, you can not only teach players how the spell is intended to be used and what kind of mechanic you're focusing on when playing with a card like Overrun here, for example, but you can also show interactions between different elements, such as a card with first strike being weaker than a card with trample. If the card with trample is a lot bigger, being able to trample over for a large amount of damage. In Magic, they do this a lot, but less frequently nowadays. But you should really put the text of the keyword on the card, especially if it is a card designed for new players. In this way, you can understand what the keyword actually does the first time you encounter it. Therefore, if you put it on a rare or mythic card later, your player will be able to understand what that card does and how powerful it is based on the fact that it doesn't show off the keyword and based on the fact that they already understand the keywords from the more simple cards that had all of those keywords previously put on it. Ideally, you would want to try to avoid mechanics that simply state something that doesn't really have any attachment to the real world, such as energy. If you get an energy counter, it goes into like your energy reserve, and then you can spend your energy reserve to just do things like summon a 6/6 beast with this Architect of the Untamed here, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot. It kind of resonates, but not as much as the more iconic elements from Magic like Trample or Flying or First Strike. In this way, you should probably try to keep your elements as close to something that players can relate to as possible, so things make very easy sense for anyone playing, even children playing your game, will be understanding that first strike means you strike first. Now, if you're going to not take something from Magic, you should definitely not take Magic's mana system. Magic's mana system served two main purposes at the beginning of the game, and one of them is lands being a way to count up to the amount of mana that you have, slowly powering up over the course of the game, and colors, which give you some sort of way to identify with the different elements of Magic and make you have sort of an identity as a player. But there are so many designers that go into making their card game and simply think, I'll just make Magic, but fix Mana Screw by doing something like making it so that way all the cards that you play can also serve as a land. In this way, you can fix the problems of mana without actually having to put lands into your game, which does solve the problem of lands, but is something that I don't think that you should do as a designer. Resources accumulation is something that lands are trying to accomplish, but can be done in many, many ways. In Hearthstone, they simply have a ticking amount of mana that goes up over time, which is incredibly simple. And this is probably the most basic element that you can put into your game that can be done in so many other ways to give you some sort of slow accumulation of resource rather than just a number that goes up by one every turn. And the identity of lands, giving identity to your game, can be done in an absolutely astronomical number of ways depending on how you want your game to be designed. For example, in Flesh and Blood, it's all about combat and fighting, and so you have a lot of cards flowing, and you can play a lot of cards that have the go again mechanic, meaning that you can gain identity without having to have some sort of established overarching color system, limiting amounts of cards that you can play as a player. There are so many different ways to limit what your player can do in your game, from actions that they're allowed to take during a turn, to a ticking counter that goes up every turn, giving you extra resources to use, to different identity elements where you can have different cards that give you different identity, or different cards that limit you from playing other cards. There are so many different ways you can actually use these elements. I think it is a real crime if your card game simply just takes lands and then goes, I'll remove the mana screw, and that'll make the land system perfect. There's so many different things you can do with card games, and I think that is what the designers should be trying to explore, if possible. If you were going to take something from Yu-Gi-Oh, I think you should take Yu-Gi-Oh's cool boss monsters. Iconic cards like the Dark Magician or the Stardust Dragon are the kind of things that can resonate with players for decades going on if you make your boss monsters really interesting and powerful in a lot of cool different ways. The cool boss monsters from the early days ended up being pretty weak, but they did a lot of solving this by having extra deck summoning be the main mechanic that is brought into Yu-Gi-Oh when they entered the Synchro and the XYZ era. Using XZ summoning, Synchro summoning, or Link summoning, as the more recent mechanics are in the extra deck, it lets you feel powerful and iconic in every single game you play, because you can build your entire deck around bringing out one massive boss monster, and then that will be your signature, just like it is in the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. By making the cards powerful and very easy to access in every game, giving them really big icons of what your deck is trying to do, you should also make your boss monster be able to end games in an easy way. It doesn't always have to be a card summoned from the extra deck. You can have cards that are easily accessible in the main deck, which are also able to end games in a big way. But by having your large boss monster be the thing that takes your opponent out and ends the game for you, will help you form that bond with that monster in your deck and make it so that way you feel the power coming from your monster and make it really a signature of the way you want to play the game. One thing not to take from Yu-Gi-Oh, however, is you definitely shouldn't take Yu-Gi-Oh's implementation of hand traps. The first real problem hand trap that was implemented in the game, in my opinion, was original Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, which allows you to negate your opponent basically doing anything, special summoning a card from the deck, adding a card from the deck, or sending a card from the deck to the graveyard. Ash Blossom was initially implemented as a form of power scaling, trying to stop the opponents from being able to get cards from their deck on the very first turn and completely comboing off with basically no recourse. So Ash Blossom came in to try to stop these decks. However, this only temporarily solves the problem and leads to even more power scaling in the future because he printed a card like Ash Blossom. A card like Appaloosa, the Bow of the Goddess, allows you to negate multiple monster activations on your opponent's turn. A card as powerful as this needs to be stopped before it can be put into play, as once it is in play, it can stop a large amount of combos that you would try to attempt on your turn. A card like this should have an answer in the game to be able to stop it easily in many decks. The problem is, once you start implementing ways to stop your opponent on the very first turn of the game before they have been able to play literally any card, you start going even further into the game where basically only turn one of the game matters. A card like Infinite Impermanence is a trap card that can turn off your opponent's Appaloosa, but as we're going on and adding more and more hand traps that can completely shut down your opponent on the first turn of the game, what actually ends up mattering a lot more is simply how many hand traps you draw in your opening hand while still having the ability to combo off. The massive turn 1 combos were clearly something that the Yu-Gi-Oh designers wanted to stop in their game, but by implementing hand traps into the game, they not only buffed the ability for the second player to interact with their opponent on the first turn, but they also enabled the first player to set up a board with backup hand traps in their own hand after executing their combo, meaning that, in a way, the first player still has a huge advantage because you not only have to break their entire board that they've already set up, possibly through your hand traps, but you also need to be able to go and play through your opponent's hand traps that they almost certainly have in their deck, because every single deck needs to be able to play on the first turn of the game. Magic also has cards which allow you to counter your opponent's cards on the very first turn of the game in eternal formats. However, in these older formats, they are typically only good against these specific combo decks, shutting them down at a key point in their combo, making it so that way their deck functionally doesn't work anymore because of the fact that you had a counter. Against more traditional decks, a card like Force will end up being really bad because it puts you down in card advantage, something really valuable in those formats. If you're going to make a game where you have a lot of interaction going on in the early turns of the game, you want to make it so that way you don't have cards which blanket almost every single card in your format and stop almost every single deck in a meaningful way. Otherwise, a lot of the decks will end up having to play a large number of the same cards simply to be able to play against other decks. Drawing inspiration from Hearthstone, I think that every designer should look at Hearthstone's polish and take that. Making your card game both look and feel good, especially if it's a digital card game, is absolutely essential for every single game and is massively overlooked in my opinion. A card like Jiraxis has not only cool feeling effects when you play it down, it says it destroys your hero and places it with Jiraxis. What does that even mean? What does that do when you play it? But it's also an iconic card from the history of World of Warcraft, meaning that there's a lot of things that you can attach to this card to make it feel really iconic, and I think they did a great job with a card like this. But just because you're trying to make your iconic characters really powerful and feel good to play, it doesn't mean you should neglect other cards that are in your game and just make all the commons feel like they're totally useless. You can build in ways into your game to make your common cards feel either iconic or memorable in some way to make it so that way players can remember them decades later without you having to put a ton of work into the design being a super powerful card. This combined with Hearthstone's good tutorial, which not only makes it feel like you're actually playing the game against meaningful WoW characters, but also has introductions to a lot of characters that you will see as you play the game further on, really makes it feel like the tutorial is just a part of the larger game itself and has a good job introducing you to not only the characters and the game itself, but also it makes it feel like you're having a good time playing through the tutorial itself. Having a good amount of polish, making your game look and feel as good as possible, really helps you aim your design process in a certain direction and can also help solidify in players' minds what your game is trying to do. A game like Flesh and Blood is really focused on the basic combat between two different players. That's what it's supposed to feel like. So all of the cards, all of the elements, all of the design should point towards that same direction and make you really feel like you're going to battle. If there's one thing I wouldn't take from Hearthstone is that you shouldn't take their inflexibility, specifically coming to different formats in the game. Outside of the solo adventures you see here, there is no way in Hearthstone early years to use your collection to do anything except for play Hearthstone's standard game mode, which is a huge wasted opportunity in my opinion. It's important when making a card game that you don't fracture your player base amongst many things, but once you have a successful card game that has started going, it's important to allow diversity in the options for players to play your game, because getting in new players, it is important to give their current players and new players trying out your experience options if they aren't satisfied with your current standard experience. Players playing the standard format will oftentimes get tired, especially if your design isn't up to snuff or if you make a lot of mistakes and players lose trust in your ability to design things. By doing this, you can have other formats, like for example in Hearthstone they have Wild, Battlegrounds, or Duels, which are all different ways to play the game of Hearthstone, but are still against another player and still have that meaningful Hearthstone feel because of having all of their focused design. It's also important that while you are establishing additional game modes, you don't sink all of your weight of your design into it. A game mode like Mercenaries came out, and Hearthstone put a lot of work behind it, making it feel like a new experience, putting a lot of effort into it. But then when it came out and ended up being full of microtransactions and not feeling at all like what the Hearthstone audience wanted, it ended up crashing and burning and causing a huge sunk cost for the company that made it. It's super important when you're making a game to continue to innovate, not only innovating new ways for the games to be played, but continuing to innovate in your main mode to keep both sides of your player bases interested at the same time, because you can't expect everyone to fall in love with the game you started with. You also can't expect everyone to hop on board when you implement something new, which means that if you want to keep a diverse player base with many people, you have to keep innovating on all different aspects of your game. If you're going to take inspiration from Pokemon, the most important thing I think Pokemon does is that their game is incredibly simple. Some of the most important cards in Pokemon are super duper easy to read. Cards like Professor's Research have basically one line of text and yet are seeing play in almost every single deck in Pokemon's history. A card like Excalibur, which allows you to attach basic energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon, has the exact same ability as a Pokemon from all the way back from the very base set. If you see here, these are both Stage 2 Pokemon, so the complexity really hasn't leveled up that much since the beginning of the game. But while I am saying this, there are many other ways that Pokemon implements depth into their game without upping the level of complexity on the game, making it easy for new players to get in, but for experienced players, there's still a lot of things to keep track of outside of just the keywords that are present on all the Pokemon. One of the ways Pokemon does this is to make winning more difficult. By having 6 prize cards that you have to take over the course of the game, it can take you multiple turns to win the game, unlike other card games where after you build up a monumental lead, you can oftentimes just close out a game very quickly. This way, Pokemon keeps it so that way they have a lot of design room and a lot of turns for you to be able to do things, meaning that they can kind of tinker and edit the way the game feels over the course of an entire game in many different ways. The most obvious way they mess with it is with Pokemon EX, or other Pokemon which make your opponent take multiple prize cards when they are knocked out. Generally given more HP and a larger, stronger attack, these Pokemon have a more risk reward associated with them, meaning that you can play decks with more EX Pokemon and have the game go faster, or you can play the deck with less EX Pokemon and try to get around the EX Pokemon in an interesting way. If you're planning on making a card game to last, it's really important that you give yourself room to grow, that you don't start your game at Mach 10 going as fast as possible, so that way you have extra things that you can do further on into your card game's lifetime without keeping the game super duper fast as soon as possible. If there's one thing that you shouldn't take for granted from Pokemon, is that they have a lot of brand recognition. Okay, so obviously not all of us have access to Pikachu and can't put Pikachu on our game, but if you're making a game about the One Piece anime, or if you're making it from Disney's IP, or if you're making a Star Wars card game, you have to make sure that your card games actually have substance behind them and aren't just cards which have cool, iconic characters on them, and then you just kind of hope that everything will work out from there. It's important that you don't forget the G part of the TCG. Having iconic characters will certainly help your game, but you shouldn't rely on it to sell your cards. You need to make a functional game that will draw people in on its own without having the reliance on brand recognition. Getting them in the door of brand recognition is something great and something I recommend you do if you have access to an iconic character. However, if you're making a game and the game isn't good, it doesn't matter how iconic your cards are, they're just going to become collector tokens. That being said, if you're going to make a collectible card game and you just want the cards to function as collectibles rather than game pieces, that is completely fine. But then you shouldn't be calling it a trading card game, and you shouldn't try to sell that to different Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic players as a game that is wanting to be played. If you don't put a lot of work into your design, a lot of these people will be disappointed and your thing will crash harder than if you just sold it as a simple collectible for people to have cards to look at. Closing out here, don't forget, even though the big titans like Hearthstone, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic are great games, I do believe that people can do better and we can make games that are better than these games that already exist. As long as new TCG designers keep on innovating, creating new ways to make games and new cards and new types of ways to play games itself, as long as these designers adapt the way their games are made based on player feedback and things that are currently going on in the ecosphere of trading card games itself, making sure that they can differently change their game in ways that are meaningful and important to players. As long as you can make cards that inspire your players to play your game more, things that are iconic and memorable for decades to come, and things that will help other designers look to your game as a source of inspiration for future game designers. And as long as you help to master your game design, make your game something that almost anyone can play at even a beginning level to all the way to a grandmaster level player, you need to be able to build a game that is not only built to last, but is built to last for everyone who can play it. I think with all of these different tools, many of the great card game designers out there can come and build something amazing, something that can stand alongside the like of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Hearthstone, Pokemon, and Magic the Gathering on its own. If you're out there building something right now, something I think you think is going to be iconic and meaningful, I just want to say thank you for watching my video. Like and subscribe if you want to see more from a video like this, and tell me down in the comments if you're making a card game yourself and what kind of effort you're putting into it and what you want it to look like in the end. Thank you for watching.